Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of leaders here in the United States and then beyond. Today with us, New York State Assembly member Rebecca Seawright. Rebecca, it is a true pleasure to have you back on Successful Philanthropy. And Rebecca, I want to start with a little bit of your background. You were elected as state assembly member back in 2014, which means you've been an assembly member for 9 years. What has this meant to you, and looking forward, what are some of your priorities?
Well, thank you, Jean. It's such an honor to be back on your show again, Successful Philanthropy, and you're such a role model to so many people with all the boards that you sit on and your various philanthropic activities. So thank you. I was elected in 2014, the first woman to hold the seat as New York State Assemblywoman, representing parts of the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island. And this legislative session, Speaker Hastie has appointed me chair of the People with Disabilities Committee. In July, the governor called a special session, as you know, in Albany, and one of two bills that was on that special agenda was the Equal Rights Amendment bill, which I'm the lead sponsor of. We passed it in July, but because it is a state constitutional amendment, it requires two passages. So we passed it in January of this year. It got its second passage on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. It will be on the ballot in November of 2024 as a referendum. So the voters of New York State will get to vote on an equal rights amendment updating the state constitution. And it was 156 years ago that our suffragettes and Frederick Douglass traveled to the Capitol in Albany to lobby for that. So 156 years is a long time to finally be getting this passed.
Yes, and I agree. And I'm glad that it's finally going to be on the ballot for all of us to vote on. And what do you think is going to happen?
I think it'll pass. We have to mount a strong campaign, an educational campaign. As you know, the United States Senate just held the Judiciary Committee hearing this week on the federal Equal Rights Amendment. And so I think passing this in New York State in 2024 is going to give the momentum for other states that don't have a state equal rights amendment, momentum for them to include and update their constitutions. The last time this section of our state constitution was updated was 1938. And so it's important to keep up with the times to continue to fight discrimination. And one of the protected classes that I did include in this expansive amendment was to protect people with disabilities from discrimination. And so we're very pleased that this did get its second passage with strong support both in the Assembly and the Senate. So we're going to really lead a strong effort around the state to get this passed.
And I think it's very important. So we've actually spoken about two different things, the Equal Rights Amendment and then work that you're doing to help people with disabilities. Getting back to the woman's issue, why has it taken so many years and why has this not passed?
Well, you know, Jean, that's a very interesting question, and it's a good question. I think it's a lack of education. You know, people like my daughter that were born in a certain era, baby boomers, you know, they didn't live without. They never knew what it was like not to have Roe versus Wade and pay equity and so many issues that our foremothers fought for and got passed. And so, you know, they're taking for granted these rights, but now college kids are all fired up and our young professionals are fired up because so many of their rights have been taken away. And with the overturning of the Dobbs decision, which led to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, now we see what's happening with our bodies, reproductive choice, and our rights that are slowly being chipped away by the federal government. And so that's one thing in our New York State legislature that we're trying to correct and put in strong laws in place. we've always looked at New York as a leader and a progressive on so many issues of policy. And so now it's championing the Equal Rights Amendment in our state constitution is just so long overdue and such a big hurdle that we're so pleased that it's going to be on the ballot.
Yes, and hopefully it will pass, and it will also pass in more states. Offhand, do you know how many states have passed an Equal Rights Amendment?
I don't have that number because it's constantly changing, but I know that Nevada, former Senator Pat Spearman led the effort. I was with Gloria Steinem not too long ago, who had a broad coalition traveling around the country. Recently, I met with a group called Vote Equality, who's registering voters around the country and really diving in and analyzing. But late Justice United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, we're never going to have complete equality until we have an Equal Rights Amendment recognizing women in our Constitution. And she said every constitution around the world, including Japan, has an Equal Rights Amendment. Ours does not. And so in order to get that equality, we need to be recognized in the Constitution.
No question. Now, getting back to people with disabilities, and I'm so glad to hear that you're working on this, because I know, Rebecca Seawright, when you get involved in something, things happen and bills get passed and legislation moves forward. So what exactly can we as citizens and then people who are interested in seeing the lives of those with disabilities improve, what can we do?
Well, one thing, that Jean, I reread your book on philanthropy and giving and volunteering time. There are a number of state-run facilities, group homes around New York State for developmentally and intellectually disabled people. And also on Long Island in April, there'll be a new center nationally recognized on autism opening up called the Vicky Center, named after Victoria Schnaps, who helped close down Willowbrook with her daughter way back when, bringing Geraldo Rivera in with a camera crew, which really led to smaller group homes around the state. But right now we're seeing a huge disparity between our nonprofit providers and what they're paying their help and the state-run facilities. And so one of the things we want to correct this legislative session is investing more dollars in the state budget for this pay discrepancy that exists between our state workers and our nonprofit providers. But I hope that you'll be able to attend in April this ribbon cutting of this Autism Vicky Center on Long Island. It's going to be very special and one of a kind in the nation.
Sounds very exciting. And if I can be in New York, I'll certainly be there. Now, something else, you're very involved in working with the elderly in your district. Talk a little bit about the elderly and what they face today, because in many ways, the elderly are a forgotten group. Too many people get older and unfortunately they're no longer able to work, and their lives slowly they dissolve into sickness or whatever. And I think we really are in a situation where it's our duty and obligation to help the elderly as much as possible. That's my opinion. I have a feeling it's your opinion too, but I'd like to hear about what you're doing for the elderly.
Well, thank you, Jean. And yes, it's absolutely my opinion that we need to be doing more for our elderly. And in my storefront office right here on the Upper East Side, we're located right next to the post office. I felt it was important once I was elected to have a fully accessible office to the public, very visible. And so we've partnered with our local high schools. The students need community service credit. And so we implemented a program where they would go into the home and help a senior citizen with their computer if they have problems, or just simple things like how to work your cell phone, how to get your iPad unstuck. And so helping our senior citizens, delivering free Meals on Wheels volunteering during COVID to the shut-in and the elderly. But going back to the Equal Rights Amendment, one of the categories that I did include was the elderly, to prevent them from being faced with discrimination. So it's an expansive Equal Rights Amendment. And since we're touching on elder law and the elderly, I do want to mention that that also is in this expanded constitutional amendment. But as we move forward, I think coming out of COVID, our senior citizen programs, I've just awarded a huge grant to the Lenox Hill Neighborhood House, the Carter Burden Senior Center for their programs. Many times, if a senior goes out to a senior center for lunch, it's not just about the lunch, it's about socializing with their peers so they're not lonely, they're not shut in, they're getting out. And so helping our senior citizen population is essential. They've paid their debt to society. And so I love teaming up volunteers, especially our younger generation, with the seniors, because there's nobody better at the computer skills and cell phones and technology than our younger population. And so the seniors enjoy having that help in their homes. And in exchange, the student gets community service credit.
Well, thank you for that work. I think it's very important. For our audience, we are with New York State Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright. Rebecca, looking forward, you have had an enormously successful career in politics, and I assume you'll continue to have that career. Is there any chance that you would run for higher office?
Well, Jean, I'm so fulfilled with what I'm doing now, helping the people on the Upper East Side and all over Roosevelt Island and Yorkville, and helping my district and really fighting to bring millions of dollars back from Albany in our state budget to invest in our local schools, our local parks, our senior centers, our libraries. And so I'm very happy doing what I'm doing and just want to continue. I'm very lucky to have a great team of staff around me. And so I want to continue to fighting for the issues that matter and make a difference in people's lives.
All very important. Now, Rebecca, one of the biggest problems, or so we think it's one of the biggest problems, is the crime situation in New York City. And we read about it day after day. Are things getting better? I'm hearing that they are, that crime is going down and things are more under control. What can we all do as citizens to be helpful and also to feel safe and secure in New York City and then beyond?
Well, always have your eyes wide open and report. Pick up the phone and call 311 or call my office at 212-288-4607 and report any suspicious activity that you see. And, you know, our subways are becoming safer. Our city is becoming safer. Here on the Upper East Side, we have a new police chief of the 19th precinct. The woman that had headed it became head of the domestic violence unit down at One Police Plaza. But I think reporting suspicious incidents that you see is always helpful, because if you don't pick up the phone and notify them, oh, I saw something, you know, an elderly woman pushing a cart with an open pocketbook and she's just ripe for being attacked or burglarized or, you know, mugged. So I think that if you alert the police, oh, and she's being trailed by somebody for a block or two, the police will dispatch a unit over to where this woman is walking up the block, and they'll just circle it in their police car. And so just reporting incidents. One thing that my office has done is teamed up with the local police department, and we've held a crime prevention forum. And we always get a lot of really good attendance. We also show it on Zoom, and people can participate that way. Or a lot of times people really like coming over to the 19th precinct. They've never thought about going there. And so they show up, they get to go in the auditorium and see arrests as they come in, and they share their stories of what they believe the top crimes are in their neighborhood and what to do and what to prevent, how to prevent it. And so we're going to continue to offer these crime prevention forums here locally in the neighborhood as we continue to see crime is going to go down.
Yes, and for most people living in New York City, no question, crime prevention is a top priority. People want to feel safe. They want their children to feel safe, and they want to live in a city. It's a beautiful city, live in a city where there isn't a lot of crime. We also want the tourists to come, and if there's too much crime, well, they stay away. One more thing, you've been very involved in education of our young children and getting more funds to education. Tell us a little bit about exactly what you've done in this area.
So we have some of the best public schools in the nation right here on the Upper East Side. And so I fought very hard to be appointed to the Education Committee. This session, I've moved over to the Higher Education Committee to examine what our higher education system is doing for students with disabilities. But in my capacity as a member of the Education Committee, I fought for millions of dollars to bring back to the district here on the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island. I recently awarded a grant of $500,000 for a green roof play space and science and technology garden. And so we're continuing to fund different projects, the resurfing of a basketball court behind East Side Middle. And so we're going to continue to invest dollars in our public education system. As a member this session of the Higher Education Committee, I recently held a press conference on the steps, the $1 million staircase inside the Capitol, where I was calling for $15 million to be added to the state budget as an investment for our CUNY and SUNY students with disabilities to be included, to increase employment opportunities, to make it easier for them on our college campuses. And so I want to invest those dollars. We're seeing a decline since COVID in both our SUNY and CUNY enrollments, and one way to increase enrollment in college is to make it easier and more accessible for our students with disabilities. Recently, I attended a CUNY-wide adaptive sports women's wheelchair basketball game, and it was so exciting. I can't wait to go back. It is one of only 7 women's wheelchair teams in the nation. And so it was very exciting. When you think about shooting a basketball and playing basketball, imagine being in a chair and trying to shoot that ball up to the hoop, and then being in a rolling chair, no less, shooting the hoop. And so it was very special to see this. And one thing that I want to get started, pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the nation right now. We're about to open 14 new pickleball courts in Central Park. And one thing that I want to do is work with the adaptive sports community for a pickleball for our students with disabilities. And so I think that that's a very exciting opportunity to repurpose some of the wheelchairs for pickleball students. And so we're really looking forward to the economic dollars that are going to come from these courts in Central Park. And people with disabilities in the sports arena, I'm very excited to have them visit in Albany this legislative session so we can allocate for more funding.
Very exciting, and I think very important. And dollars spent on education and sports for young people and also older people, I think, are very important dollars. We're in a city environment in New York City, and well, we all know that sports and movement and activity is very, very important. Now, what about businesses after COVID? Are you finding that most businesses are recovering? And what about the people who all lost businesses and lost jobs? Are they pretty much getting reemployed, or are we still in a dilemma, and a big dilemma here?
Well, when we talk about the people with disabilities community, we're in a workforce crisis. And right now we're hemorrhaging jobs, and it's become a major, major crisis in this community. People are leaving, working in group homes as direct service providers because they can make more working at a retail store or a fast food restaurant like McDonald's. So we need to invest, and that's what we're focused on this legislative session in my committee, is increasing the dollars. I have a legislation that I've sponsored. It's a piece of legislation that is also being sponsored in the state Senate, which will add a $4,000 wage enhancement to this direct service provider field. And so we're very encouraged by that. But right now we're in a workforce crisis, especially with the IDD community. In terms of our restaurants and our small businesses around the neighborhood, I think they're bouncing back. Some of them that have closed permanently are reinventing themselves with new businesses, and we're investing grant dollars to help them get back on their feet. So the Upper East Side is alive and booming. And so the restaurants are back and they're filled, and many of them you can't get a reservation at. So,
and what about the rest of the state and the country?
I think we're seeing, in terms of the state, we're seeing more and more people getting back on their feet, getting jobs, coming out of COVID. As we've come out of this COVID crisis, a lot of people have reinvented themselves. I mean, look, pre-COVID, we didn't know about Zoom, and now we're able to save a lot of state money because we're no longer needing these office buildings and office towers in New York City. We're able to convert it to affordable housing and help with the homeless crisis, or other type of zoning laws are being put in place because people they have found very effectively can work from their homes.
And can pretty much work from anywhere. And I think Zoom's really revolutionized the workplace, which I think is very, very important. And is there anything else you want to add that's particularly important to you?
Well, I think inviting everyone, all our viewers, to come up to the state capitol, visit your legislators, stop by my office, kick your shoes off and hang out with us a while, and we'll show you how state government works. Right now, we're right in the midst of negotiating a huge multi-billion-dollar state budget where we're trying to equalize funding for our transportation, criminal justice, healthcare system, housing, and people with disabilities. So it's just so massive and so broad. And so come to Albany, visit us, and see your government at work, and voice your opinion and advocate for what you would like to see as the priority.
Well, two more areas we really haven't spoke about that and about in this show is one on the immigrants, and are we able to handle the large influx of immigrants into the state of New York from a financial point of view, and are we able to find housing and jobs for them?
I think Mayor Adams has done a good job in dealing with this issue. One of the things that I advocated for at the state level a few years ago was the passage of the DREAM Act. So we want higher education to be accessible to our children of immigrants. All of our families have ancestors that immigrated here. So we have to treat everyone with respect and dignity, and be as supportive as we can.
And I can't agree more. We are a nation built on immigration. And yes, you're correct. Almost all of us, or all of us really, unless we are American Indians, we came from another country. So we have to remember that, and our ancestors did, and we have to treat our immigrants with dignity and respect. And then finally, we were speaking about immigrants, and then also the job situation. And then there's a migration of people out of New York to other places. And this happened during the COVID pandemic. And I think maybe more a result of the fact that people realized that they could now work from home and use a Zoom to relocate maybe in places they would have worked in once before. How has that affected New York State?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, New York, there's no place like New York City. It's the melting pot of the world. And so people that did transition and leave the city during COVID are starting to come back. And a lot of people miss, only in New York City do you get Broadway shows and the theater and the bright lights and Wall Street and some of the world's most famous restaurants and culture, Lincoln Center, only in the Big Apple. And so what I hear from people is we have a strong tourism that's increasing our economy, and that New York City is bouncing back more than ever.
All very important. Rebecca, finally, we have 1 minute left. What advice would you give to a young person who wants to follow in your footsteps?
I would say come hang out with us and shadow me for a day, and also go down to City Hall and observe City Council in session. There is a chamber, a gallery above the bullpen where the City Council members debate bills, and you can just take a trip downtown and sit up in the gallery and watch your city government at work. We also have the same kind of gallery at our state capitol, where you can sit above the bullpen and watch 150 members debate bills, and it can be quite interesting. So do internships. I always encourage our young people at all ages. We have high school young women from Chapin interning in our office, as well as our public schools in Brearley. And so there's nothing more. Jean, that's really how I got my start in politics. I was an intern for Governor Ann Richards in Texas, and Sarah Weddington, who's still the youngest person ever, not just youngest woman, youngest person ever to argue a case and win before the United States Supreme Court. And of course, that was Roe versus Wade. So internships and shadowing elected officials.
Nice. Rebecca, you've been a wonderful guest, and I want to thank you for your service to the state of New York and also to our country. This concludes Successful Philanthropy. Our guest today, Rebecca Seawright. She's a New York State Assembly member. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.